Good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to the Nation Shared Transport Conference. I'm delighted you can be here with us. We are in online format for the third year running now. Do participate in all these sessions we have coming up, starting with this one. We are the National Body for Shared Transport, a charity dedicated to its social, economic and environmental benefits. And I think it's fair to say it's been a mixed year in the shared transport world and the worlds that it links into, with growth there quite strongly, but of course lots of perturbations and huge economic challenges facing us all as individuals and operators and authorities alike. I think I remain optimistic on balance, but frustrated. So people ask us less and less what all this shared transport malarkey is or why they should care about it. And we see more and more integrated action. We see more ambitious plans coming forwards. All of that is really, really heartening. More interest from government, likewise. But we have a chance for emissions to mountain to climb in this country. And it's still a pretty rare day when we make a real breakthrough and feel like we've really moved that needle on the dial. It does happen. I want to see that become more and more common. Undoubtedly, one of the more positive developments for all of us in the sustainable transport sector in the last few years has been the budgetary, the structural commitments from government towards walking and cycling, with that aim of 50% of urban journeys being undertaken that way. So in that light, I am super delighted to have Danny speaking to us to start our conference off, CEO of the newly formed and indeed forming Active Travel England, the government agency for walking and cycling. I followed Danny actually for a few years on Twitter, so I was pretty excited when he got appointed. I can't wait to hear what he's got to say about this world of active travel and how it links into the rest of sustainable transport, I hope. Danny's going to talk for a little bit. There'll be a chance for a few questions with him, so do, as they occur to you as we go along, pop them in the chat and we will ask as many as we can. And then we'll segue into our first full session. Danny, thanks for being with us, and over to you.
Morning, everybody. No pressure at all there, Richard. Thank you very much. So as and Mark, hello on the train. Hope you're all right. So as Rich mentioned, I'm the CEO of Active Travel England. My background is actually not in this sector at all. It's in running media and tech businesses and building startups. But when I was given a call at the end of last year and asked to effectively build a public sector startup around something I really care deeply about, that was too good a challenge to miss, really. So I joined formally on the 1st of August, and that's when we formally came into existence. And what I'm going to do is just very briefly kind of tell you where we're at, what we're about, and some of the things that are going to be happening over the next few months. So I hope that's okay. I'm kind of got half an eye on the chat, and if I lead off in any direction, or you want to ask an immediate question, go for it, and I might spot it. So at the moment, Active Travel England is relatively small. We're about 30 people right now, but last week I think we pushed out 26 different job offers. We probably have another 20 going out before Christmas, and we'll certainly be at about 60 people by end of January, early February, probably getting close to our full complement of just under 100 people by the end of March. Now, what are we going to do? So we're an arm's length body of the Department for Transport. We're headquartered in York. In fact, we've literally just opened our office in York last week, and we'll start to be populating it with like real people in the next couple of days. And in terms of how we're going to structure ourselves, we've kind of got three legs, if that's possible. So one key leg is the inspectorate leg, which many of you will have heard of. That's being led by Brian Deegan, and that is a team of people who will be looking at active travel schemes, at projects, and assessing them essentially, and making sure that they're being delivered to the right standards, making sure that they're being delivered to the right budgets, and making sure that they're being delivered on time. So that's absolutely one key plank. Another is our planning and development side. So we will be becoming a statutory consultee fairly soon. I can't say when that is because it's not public yet, but that's all working along really well with DLUC. And The planning team is headed by Graham Grant, who comes from Newcastle. His team is coming together quite quickly, and our goal there is kind of not to get in the way of planning, but it's to actually help developers, actually also help investors to plan active travel right from the outset into new developments, whether that's housing or commercial. So we will have a StatCon role for any planning development over 150 units in terms of housing, or I think it's 7,500 square meters in terms of commercial. We've been developing toolkits that we've been testing with local authorities. I think we've done 25 LAs so far, and we'll be rolling those out over time. And our goal really is to develop a sort of kite mark of active travel planning that enables everybody from authorities themselves to developers to institutional investors actually to kind of synchronize active travel into their thinking. So that's leg number 2, and then leg number 3 is essentially tools and data. So many of you will have heard of Robin Lovelace, who is our interim director of data and analysis. We are soon to be announcing actually our director of data and analysis, and some very funky new tools that we've already got up and running. So some of you will have heard of the cycling propensity tools that Robin developed. We're halfway through developing a walking to school propensity tool. We're also looking to develop a platform which we hope to launch as a national active travel infrastructure database, which will allow us to work with local authorities and other third parties to see in one go kind of what's actually on the ground. That's going to be as open source as possible. And essentially, I see our role in all of these things really as being a convener, bringing people together to make stuff happen, both within government and outside government. Outside of those 3 pillars, the rest of the team is composed of stakeholder engagement roles, internal finance roles, investment roles, etc. internally. You'll have seen, hopefully some of you will have seen anyhow, some of the videos that we started putting out. We put out a really cool video last week about a school just outside Ipswich where unbelievably 90% of pupils come to school either on bike or by foot, which is super exciting. And that's actually the highest percentage of active travel for any school in the whole of Europe. So it proves it can be done if done properly. But we'll be putting out instructional videos and guidance fairly soon, both on things like LTN20, but also on rural design guidance and so on. I talked about us being a convener. I've been spending a lot of my time talking to local authorities up and down the country, and we're beginning to build networks of all sorts of other parties that really care about this stuff. One thing I want to highlight is that the case for active travel, I think, has been really made in the worlds of health and in terms of things like carbon emissions and net zero. What's less robust, I think, at the moment is the economic case for active travel. And by that, what I really mean is how do we help improve productivity in England's towns and cities? How do we help local businesses? And how do we really get politicians on side? Because there's still some skepticism around that. So we're learning really fast. National Highways is being really helpful to us and in coaching us in the way that they work through their sort of 5-year investment cycles. And really our ambition is to mimic that, actually, to work towards having a 5-year investment cycle with a national plan and get people really behind all of that. So what you'll see from us increasingly is calls for help from employers, from big local employers, from business groups, that kind of community that hasn't been as involved as perhaps it should have been, or we'd hope it might be, in pushing for active travel interventions. One of the things that we've been doing in the past couple of months, other than kind of getting ourselves set up, is we've been reviewing to what extent transport authorities are really ready for active travel around the country. So whereas in the past the DfT might have funded active travel really through a formula, what we've been looking at is looking at whether authorities are really capable of delivering different sorts of active travel interventions. So what I mean by that is some schemes are quite complicated. So for example, you take a low traffic neighborhood or you take a mini Holland, they're quite complex schemes to get across, both in terms of consultation and engagement with locals, but also in terms of the implementation. Something like a school street at the other end is it's pretty complex in terms of the engagement, but it's relatively smaller, relatively easier to handle. And what we've tried to do is say, well, look, these are different types of interventions that we're prepared to fund. But if you're at a really capable level as an authority, we'll fund you more towards the more complex stuff. And if you're less capable, we'll fund you more towards the easier stuff. The purpose here is really to try and find something that wins for every local authority, that fits kind of what they're able to do and what's kind of right for their local area. So we're trying to basically bring everyone with us. What we've done is we've tiered all of the local authorities. We haven't announced that publicly yet, although we have told the authorities themselves. And in some parts of the country, that information is now public, either through FOIs or because the authorities have published it already. And our goal really is to try and bring any authority that wants to get there kind of up the ladder over time, so that they can deliver more complex schemes, but also schemes that have bigger results for more people. But we're recognizing that in some places we have to start small and build consensus at that scale, and then build them up over time. And that's going to take ultimately several years, but feels like the right way to go. You'll all be aware that we had a little bit of an autumn statement after the mini budget, and that in the 4 short months that AT's been in existence, we've had 3 governments. So some of that has required a bit of back and forth and a slowing down of some of the things we wanted to do. But AT is very much here to stay. And we'll be able to be announcing more concrete stuff on funding, hopefully pretty soon, but I can't confirm when that's going to be. So, Richard, I think that's it from me in terms of my kind of introduction, and I'm super happy to take questions.
Danny, thank you very much for that. Fantastic. My ears perked up throughout, but looking at database, I wonder if that's where shared bike options might find their way in. We already have that data, so that's to your point about being a convener, that strikes me as an immediate sort of example of how we can fuse our worlds together a bit, because certainly I think I speak for all within shared transport, whether they're on 4 wheels or 2, that they fundamentally back the direction of travel, the spend, and so on that's going on here. They know that that's part of world they need to succeed in.
Yeah, it's a really important point. I mean, there's loads of different data sources we could be using, with some of which are open source, some of which not. You mentioned 2 or 4 wheels. We're agnostic about kind of how we get people walking and cycling and wheeling more. If that involves car journeys at the beginning of it, then that's a good thing, as well as if it doesn't, frankly, our overall objective is more actual journeys. So that means full journeys by walking, cycling, or wheeling. But overall, so long as we can grow the pie, that's great. I noticed a couple of questions in the chat. Am I allowed to kind of go to them? This question about investment outside of large urban areas. Yeah, we're absolutely up for that. I think rural areas didn't necessarily get the best of the deal in previous funding rounds, and we will look to change that in future funding rounds. And I think I mentioned very briefly that we're looking to produce rural design guidance that will come out in stages, probably with some more thought leadership type guidance initially, and then more concrete guidance over time. Just to be clear, actually, the DfT retains all policy elements of what we do. We're the delivery agent, but we do have a role in influencing policy, and we're getting very, very hands-on in some of that already behind the scenes, which you'll have to wait to see.
Good. Thank
Um,
you.
Another quick question: in tier two counties, what, if any, notice will AT take of district council role? We've got the same issue actually in the combined authorities, and all over. So for now, for the time being, we're focusing at the higher level. Over time, we do want to go down to district or local authority level, but it's going to take us some time to get there. Firstly, because we're not fully up to speed, and we need to make sure that our tools and solutions work first at that level. Secondly, we will start to work our way around the country and talk to district or more local authorities. One of the ways we're going to do that is we're setting up a regional engagement team. So there will be, I think it's 21 people. So it's 7 regions, 3 people in each. And those 3 people will be roughly a planner, an engineer, and a stakeholder engagement role. And they'll be based around the country, and their job will be to engage really hyper locally, both with authorities, but also with developers and big employers and so on. Should I keep going from the question?
Keep going, yeah. Keep going down.
I hope this is all right, by the way. Will we help local authorities develop off-road cycle infrastructure, e.g. old rail lines? So it's yes. The slightly complicated answer, because there are things going on around the historic rail estate, which some of you may know about. That's all kind of pointing in the right direction. I'm just not sure how much of it is public versus not public, but there's some good progress going on that in the background. Again, I'll reference the point that in previous funding rounds, those sorts of schemes probably didn't get a look in. Where we do want to look at them is, where we would encourage people to think about those is where a rural line or a rural link creates access to jobs, creates access to further education, things like that. We have to recognise that active travel investment, certainly in the current climate, has to be about helping people access things that make the country work better, if that makes sense. So really encouraging authorities to think about it in the context of not just let's build a line in the middle of nowhere that doesn't really do anything. It's very much more about, can we build that line in a way that links to an industrial estate or that links to an employment centre, that kind of approach. So what you'll see is much more of a focus on economic productivity. That could be tourism, but it's really critical that it hooks up to a wider kind of context like that. Right, where else can we go? We're getting quite focused with some of these questions.
Danny, can I throw in one that's higher up the chat? So mine
Yep.
just struck me as a really good one. About you touched nearly on this, and what you were saying, robust evidence of the impact of improving cycling pedestrian access to town centres stacked against spending the same pounds on parking provision. You can see the sort of logic of the question there.
Yeah.
Somebody saying that would be very useful.
So sorry, what's the actual question though?
So I think, will they, you were talking about having the evidence base, and I think they're asking, will there be some kind of formula almost, if you like, of what's the economic payback of investing in walking, cycling infrastructure and boosting that access to a town centre versus car-based, i.e. parking?
Okay, so I have to be quite careful here, because I have personal view versus ATE's view, but no, we won't. It's not ATE's job to make those decisions. That's for local authorities to make those decisions. However, what I have noticed, so through the process of assessing all of the local authorities and assigning them into tiers or levels, we reviewed actually in a systematic way what those local authorities were trying to say, and of those authorities that kind of get active travel, and by that I mean what we are calling levels 2 and 3. So we had 5 levels. Sorry, level 0 is those authorities that really aren't out of the starter grid yet. Level 1 is the majority of authorities, where they're keen to do something, but they don't necessarily have the tools in the toolkit to do that yet. and we're going to have to work with them and help them to get there. And levels 2s and 3s are those authorities where they've got a decent officer base. Their local politicians are supportive, and they've already got a history and good plans for developing this stuff. So of those sort of upper levels, and by the way, there's a level 4 as well, which no one made. That's a sort of aspirational that we hope will get people to over time. Of those two and levels, authorities in level 2 and 3, I think it's 84% of them have talked about the fact that they need to invest in active travel in order to free up access to new development. So what you've got is cities like Colchester and Chelmsford where they're literally saying, we can't stuff any more road traffic or motor vehicle traffic down our roads. We need to start investing in a combination of active travel and public transport to free up capacity on our road network. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to build the housing developments or the industrial developments that we're going to need to grow our towns and cities. So 84%, that's quite a lot. 90 something percent, I think it's 96% of them talked about. We've got interloper. 96% of them talked about the need to integrate active travel and public transport. So they're super keen on that. You know, what you see is that there's a core of probably 20 of the 78 authorities around the country that absolutely get this and are really keen to look at ways to reduce traffic congestion and increase investment or economic activity in their area. But it's about 20 of the 78.
I come to the time. Thank you for your time here. I wanted to just close out with a midterm horizon kind of question. So 3 years time, say, what will give us some flavor of what success will look like for ATE? What's it going to be enabling in various areas across any topics or specifics?
Yeah. So what we want to do is be in a position where we're really helping local authorities to win, essentially. So that means helping them to deliver best practice and beating them up a little bit when they go in the wrong direction, but see us more like a coach than a nasty school teacher. So on the one hand, we're here to encourage, and on the other, we're here to sort of encourage you in the right direction, let's say. Two is that we want to be in a position where we're providing tools that really help the whole sector to mature, because it's not a mature sector yet. And three is there's some questions in the chat I've noticed about kind of what we can do around selling the proposition better. And part of that is going to come down to us bringing new voices on board, and particularly employers, industry, kind of commercial voices, less voices from this sector. I think people have heard enough of the business case as articulated by this sector in a way. We need to hear more of the business case articulated by the big employers in the cities and towns around the country.
Great, thank you. Very interesting note to end on. I fully agree with that. We look forward to collaborating with you wholeheartedly, as do pretty much everybody in the chat by the looks. You'll see many offers of connections and hopes for that. Thanks so much for getting conference off to a great start, and look forward to catching up soon. And we will now move into our first full session. Thank you very much, Dave Sage from Coma, who's running all this in the background. Okay. So thank you and welcome to those just joining to our first full session of the National Shared Transport Conference from us, Coma UK, the national body for shared transport. We are here to do some further, I think it's fair to say, big thinking after that start off from Danny. The clue is in the title. We want this session to be giving us some bold, full-stretched ideas that we can then pick up and run with here in the UK. We have quite an international panel of speakers with that inspiration point in mind, because although the UK is, I think it's fair to say, in its best ever position on shared transport, and it's one with, as I mentioned earlier, big growth, but also pretty substantial scale now in terms of locations and number of users, we've got a long way to go. And if you look at how we're doing per head of population, compared with some best-in-class countries, you can see that very clearly. So we have some real experts here. I am really looking forward to this myself. not least the chair of the session, Rebecca Karbaumer, who is City of Bremen. Both Rebecca and Bremen, and there's an interlink there, of course, are world leaders in this space, pushing forwards with some new policies just in the last few weeks even, but have also been on a long journey here. Bremen's first mobility hub going in I think I'm right in saying 2003, whereas we're only on 2 Coma accredited mobility hubs in the UK. So we're looking forward to this. Thanks all for waiting a little bit for the start of this session. Rebecca, over to you.
Great, thanks for handing over, and welcome everybody this morning to the big thinking tent. As you can see, I've set up a tent in my study. I haven't quite decided if we're camping, if we're a circus, if we're an outdoor event. It's a bit chilly today, so it's an indoor tent. Tent fort. It can be whatever you think. But anyway, I've pitched it in my study. I've brought my favorite Shared Mobility Rocks LPs. There we go in the background, and I am ready to vibe with 5 amazing panelists and you in the audience for a little over the next hour or so. Joining us in the thinking tent are transport and mobility rock stars from a variety of backgrounds and across Europe. We've got Dr. Gillian Annable, Professor of Transport at the University of Leeds. I'll introduce everybody more in more detail when we bring them up on stage. We also have Pete Dyson, who's a behavioral scientist and specialist. We've got Laura Heupke, based in Frankfurt am Main. Benoit Yamundieu, I'm sorry if my pronunciation is awful, who's dialing in from Paris today. And Philippe Vatteo, the Deputy Mayor of the city of Ghent in Belgium. So we've got a lot of geographical dispersion and diversity. I'm calling in from Bremen and northern Germany, for a lot of different professional views on the field for the next hour. Basically, the rules of the tent, or what we've prepared for the next hour or so, is that we've asked each panelist to prepare a short 3-minute statement maximum about the role of shared mobility in decarbonizing transport. And what we're going to have is an open and spontaneous conversation about what we need, what we have, what we need, what we want to see, and the development of shared mobility in decarbonizing transport, in policies, in services and ideas, and how that fits into some buzzwords and strategies that we've seen popping up in the last few years. But we also invite you as the audience to ask questions to the panelists and to join that conversation. But please post your question in the chat first, and then we'll screen that and we'll invite you up on stage into the ring around the campfire to join us for that conversation. And I invite you, and all the speakers as well, panelists, to be provocative. Feel free to be provocative and to disagree. I mean, there's nothing more boring than a panel discussion where everybody's on the same page and everybody has the exact same opinion. So, Philippe, I'm looking at you as well. So first, I'd like to invite Gillian up on the screen, up on the stage. Welcome, Gillian. You are morning. Hi. You're a professor of transport and energy at the University of Leeds. You've been since 2015 there, and like myself, you are also a geographer and urban planner from the background. So here's looking at you. Then we have the broad view. I think that's our job.
We're the best. Geography rocks.
Exactly, geography rocks. We're the ones that are supposed to look beyond the table, beyond the range. And you have a really broad range of specialties. You specialize in travel behavior, in climate change, in energy, in market segmentation, demand side solutions. That is a lot to look at, but it's so important to look at these things together. There we go. Before I let you give your 3-minute statement, I warned you in advance that I'd ask you a slightly personal question. But what's your favorite mode of transport, Gillian?
It's walking, without a shadow of a doubt. just because I'm able to. Obviously not everybody is, but just to go under your own steam. It's a slow mode of transport. You can absorb your environment, people. You can usually estimate how long it's going to take you, because you don't encounter delays and so on if you don't twist your ankle like I did the other day. Yeah, that's if I can, and I've situated myself living wise, not in a big city in a market town, but where I can get to everything from my front door, so I don't need a car.
Perfect. That is absolutely my favorite. It's one of the first things we learn to do in life, and one of the last things we hope that we lose the ability to do. And it's by far underrepresented in transport planning and policy. But anyway, getting ahead of ourselves. You prepared a 3-minute statement for us, introductory. So the floor, the microphone, whatever you like to use, your megaphone is yours.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, I'm gonna set the scene with something and a bit of a call to arms here. So as you say, I've most of my work now, it focuses on travel behaviour and in understanding travel patterns, but it all now is toward the goal of understanding how we can use that knowledge to reduce carbon emissions. So let's focus on the fact that the UN just last month brought some really frightening, but I think, to be frank, refreshing honesty that really ought to be the first line that each of us are using every time we introduce our particular initiatives and so on. They said there's no credible pathways to keeping us within safe carbon limits. And by this, what they mean is that there's no country that has come up with the right combination of measures to do this, to keep us on these pathways. They have said there is just about time for us to do so, but the fact is that none of these packages of policies exist out there, and there are no exceptions, the EU, the UK in particular. And for transport, it's very complicated, obviously, but there's no pathways left for decarbonising the transport sector without deep cuts in car use by 2030, in half a dozen years' time. And those deep cuts in car use are of at least 20% reduction in the amount that cars are used from today's levels. And this is alongside really ambitious uptake of EVs, more ambitious than some of us are going for it at the moment. And the cuts are necessary in part to compensate for the fact that heavy goods vehicles need a bit longer to do their thing, right? But it's also because we have completely and utterly failed to make those cuts in car use, and we've allowed cars to become obese, so that conventionally fueled cars are locking in fossil fuels for decades to come. EVs are becoming obese, so we're not going to be able to electrify or green the electricity system as quickly, because the electricity system needs to be bigger to cater for all these big batteries, right? So we've really, really messed this up. And we're talking then about a scale of change that has not happened anywhere in the world, other than maybe in some small pockets of best practice cities. So when we think about the talk that we've just heard, and we think about how we want to grow the pie for walking and cycling, and how we're focused on trip rates and mode share in terms of trip rates, and we aspire to places like the Netherlands, where they've got 29% of trips undertaken by bike. The Dutch are as carbon intensive in their travel as we are. Their average per capita carbon emissions from travelling in the Netherlands is the same as in the UK, because they love their cars, they have big cars, and frankly, car use is not restricted in the Netherlands. So we don't even know how to do what we've got to do. So my main message for you today is for you to all to be more honest. I'm not accusing you of lying, but I am accusing you of focusing on your individual interventions and growing the patronage and growing the use of your individual interventions, and really ignoring the fact that what we need to do is get people out of their cars onto these interventions, and that we cannot do that unless we couple these interventions with significant car restraint. And so many of you really don't acknowledge that and actually admit that really it's going to all fail in terms of some of these bigger societal objectives. Even if your initiatives are successful, those objectives are not going to be met. So my big idea is honesty this morning.
Gillian, that is awesome. I think that is one of the best opening statements I have ever heard. With respect to just those colleges, let's just cut the BS. We don't have time for diplomacy anymore. There is an urgency, not only in the air, there is a quite clear urgency, and we've got a state of emergency, and there's no way around it anymore. Thank you so much. We'll come back to that in the conversation. Next, I'd like to invite Pete Dyson onto the stage, into the ring. Pete Dyson, you're author and speaker on travel and transport behavior, and you've co-authored the book Transport for Humans, which is a super title in itself. It speaks for itself. But you were also the former principal behavioral scientist for the Department of Transport.
That's
so
right.
Yeah. Broad range of experience, and that you've also recently started a PhD at the University of Bath in October.
Yeah, that's where I'm dialing in from. Hello, everyone.
Welcome from Bath. Personal question before I let you give your opening statement, which is hopefully going to be just as good as Gillian's, even better. What's your personal transport pet peeve?
Oh, pet peeve. Probably false information, I think, on public transport being told one thing and experiencing another. Maybe that is a personal bugbear of mine. Yeah, being told that the train is now approaching and the time ticks by and then the clock never moves on, or that that ominous word delayed. That sort of public information. I think we spend so much time working so hard on the engineering, but then we fail when it comes into contact with the user, and that kind of makes my heart sink.
I get that. Mine is city bicycles without baskets.
Okay, yeah.
It's good for transporting shopping, but it's always a particular group of people that doesn't have a bicycle and then ask, can you carry my stuff for me? But anyway, everybody's got a pet peeve. But it's a side point. Your opening statement, please, Pete.
Yes, thank you. I should use my 3 minutes well. I have 3 points to make over my 3 minutes. The first, and I agree wholeheartedly with Gillian's point of view there. If I can help translate it over to how we might think about a user point of view. First, that people aren't cargo. So if we're going to make these, whenever we make these changes, we're going to need to acknowledge that we've got people moving. Now, obviously, people and cargo share some similarities. They do need to get from A to B. They need to do so punctually, promptly. Even cargo needs to be stored upright in a cool, dry place like people. But people obviously have a head on their shoulders, and we're going to need to make these other options. If not, we're going to need to make them compelling, we're going to make them easy to do, to provide alternatives. We are also, as we hear, going to need regulation and legislation to change the order of the options that we have available. So we're going to need to think, and we're going to need to work with an engineering or an infrastructure community that need to acknowledge the value of journeys that people are going to make. And I think I'd probably reiterate the point that we need to move really away from thinking of there being a transport problem and coming up with transport solutions, but really thinking about the wider value of journeys, which I'll get to last. The second is a point that I think is a worthwhile analogy of a more balanced diet of transport options. So really at the moment, many of us are dining out and relying on a fast food diet of individual car ownership. And just like diet, some of these are choices that we make, but we're also stuck in the environment of the food that we have available that's served to us. And I think it's a worthwhile comparison to say we need more people to balance their set of options and their ability to not have to travel as being a legitimate solution. So again, metaphors of growing pies and market share are worthwhile to pick apart to actually bring in non-travel alternatives as a viable transport solution. Staying local as well, for instance, very local, for instance. It will mean, though, that we need to really rethink how we measure transport and travel, and it's just not good enough to only measure traffic counts of dots moving on a map, and then we need a much better picture of how individuals are acting. And that means knowing how many people are multimodal, which is to say how many people own a car but also have other ways to travel, how we can multiply that many times over. I'm also reminded that as we increase the set of options, we kind of need to thread the needle, and we need to thread the needle because we need to demonstrate what good looks like to people. I'm struck by what a 20% cut in traffic might look like. I think it's something like in the UK half terms we see about 14-15% reduction in traffic. So imagine a world where you've got half-term levels of traffic all year around, but a little bit more than that. So there's quite a long way to go. We also need to go with the grain of people's options. So that means looking at what trajectories are already happening. And as a behavioral scientist, I'm less optimistic about getting people to do stuff they don't want to do. I'm much more optimistic about spotting trends and helping people along the way. So if there's one shift that we've seen post-COVID, it's that car ownership has changed and fewer households are owning multiple cars. So when we think about shared transport, there's probably a lot that we need to do to think about how we can make the best use of the fleet, because people are already moving in that direction. So thirdly and finally, we need to think beyond just the transport system. And I think opening speaker Danny made that clear. There was one point made which I could bring up, which was that about parking. I think it's found that cycle parking, it was estimated to deliver 5 times the retail spend per square meter of parking compared with car parking. That was in Value for Cycling, which was published in 2016, so quite recently. Do we need to do better at showing what the value of different ways to travel is? We will, as the other speakers will, talk about going beyond national borders, but what I'm meaning by that is actually going beyond Europe and thinking of transport as a much wider system, looking to the modes of travel that are coming through the developing world, because decarbonisation is a global problem, and there's no sense in the UK or in Europe innovating new technological solutions while the rest of the world might move at pace in a completely different direction. And we need to think hard about what happens to the vehicle fleet that's going to be effectively decommissioned in the UK over the coming decades, where that goes and how other countries use it. So I hope that's good food for thought. Look forward to the remainder of the session.
Thanks very much, Pete. I was hoping you'd bring your motto, "People are not cargo." Quite clearly, it's also one of the best I've heard in a long time. And we'll come back to you and your expertise as a behavioral scientist in the conversation about how we can manage that shift with very predictably irrational human beings. Exactly. So our next opening statement for our next panelist, I'd like to invite Laura up on stage. Hi, Laura. Thanks for joining us from Frankfurt online. You are the head of international sales and business development at IOKI, and IOKI is also one of the sponsors for today's and tomorrow's events. And IOKI is, I also just recently learned this, sorry, is a business unit of the Deutsche Bahn, the German railway system, and your unit for sustainable mobility. And you've got to focus on on-demand mobility and the mobility analyses for strong public transport. I'm really looking forward to your opening statement, but before, question, how did you get to work today?
Oh, honestly, first of all, I'm still at home. But however, I will go first by foot to the main station. I would take the train, and then the rest I would do walking again. So
you've got a multimodal journey ahead of you, but like a lot of us, your life has probably changed a bit more often, working from home more often, which also means changes for our transport system, but also new opportunities. So I'll give you the floor for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So first of all, thank you to Gillian and to Pete as well. I think they gave already quite a good overview when it comes like to decarbonization, especially to Gillian giving the stage for it. What I would like to add to what has been said already is when we look at mobility, and I think the figures are valid for sure for many of the countries in Europe, is that in bigger cities, we only cover 30 to 40% of the mobility needs of the people. So through public transportation, which can then really like be compared like to a car. So only 30 to 40% in cities. And if you look into rural areas, even less than 5% can really cover their mobility needs through public transport. So if we talk about that, we really have to decarbonize and that we have to reduce cars by like 20% or even more, how can we assume that people, don't use a car if they are so much dependent on it? Yeah. So I think that's something that we really have to think through. And I myself have never owned a car in my life. So I really accept like double times to get like to my destination. And even today to go to work, it usually costs like maybe 30 minutes to go by car. And I take like 90 minutes, so triple of the time. So we really need to rethink mobility if we want to see a shift from cars to public transport. And for that, we really need to think it from a customer perspective. And of course, it has this ecological impact in regards like to car reduction and decarbonization. But of course, it also has a social impact. But I mean, let's concentrate on the decarbonization because that's what the question. So when we think about customers and we think about like how could mobility look like in the future, we always have to think about it's always the fact that someone needs to go from A to B. That's it, right? That's the need that they have. And it's not that they definitely want to use a car. I mean, maybe there are some exceptions. Like in Germany, we can go very fast on Autobahn. So people for sure love to like drive super fast. I mean, that's maybe an exception. But other than that, people really have the need to go from A to B. And it has to be accessible, like looking at wheelchair, looking at elderly people. It has to be safe and it has to be economical. So these are for sure the main drivers in regards to customer needs. So we all know that a part of like not covering only like the public transport, like with the mobility needs with the public transport, in most of the cases also accessibility, safety nets, and so on is missing. So we need to find a way to cover all these mobility needs that are then or equal or even better than a car. The question is now, of course, how can we do that? What I have mainly seen is that we often start creating concepts without really looking into data. And we do have a lot of data today. We have big databases, we have great analytics tools, and we have also experts in our sector. So let's use them to really create a great concept when it comes to public transport. And then secondly, let's think really public transport holistically, like in an ecosystem, from micromobility up to macromobility, because what we currently see is like everyone thinks it by themselves. And it's not going to work. Yeah, that's like how we will not satisfy the mobility needs. And in the end, what people really need is that they can decide when and from where they want to go. Nowadays, I mean, let's be honest, you have to go to the bus stop and it has to be exactly to that time at that place. So that's something that we need to change. The next thing is to choose a transport mode. So thank you very much, Rebecca, for asking like which are like the preferred transport modes, because in the end, everyone has another one. Some people cannot maybe even go with a bicycle. The next one loves walking and so on. So we have to consider various transport modes. And then also easy access and also correct information, as also Pete mentioned already, and ticketing has to be easily available to every passenger. So only like this, we can really make sure people have covered their mobility needs, it's seamless, and people would really consider switching from a car to public transport. So now, how does come on demand also into it? On demand is a great solution when it comes to like the first and to cover that. And on demand helps people really to decide by themselves when and where they want to be mobile. That's one thing. And maybe just to give you like a great example, Oslo, for example, is really considering until 2030 to replace in their city 400,000 cars with 30,000 autonomous on-demand shuttles, which is an amazing number, right? However, currently, especially due to a huge automobile lobbyism for sure as well, we are still critical when it comes like to like creating these shuttles in autonomous, and on demand definitely needs shuttles, and when it comes to autonomous, it's a completely different thing than a simple car, because you want to be inclusive. So these cars needs to be created, and then we are also ready to have autonomous on demand. There are a lot of great players in the market, startups that are really keen and doing really a great job in that as well, with whom we are also partnering very well. So we are on a great way there also on autonomous on demand, and happy to share that also later in another conversation, bilateral or also in this panel. So let's get me to an end. Jillian, you said it fantastically. You said honesty is like your word for today. I was thinking, what is like my word for today? I would say maybe disruptive, in the sense of like Danny also talked about the 15-minute cities. Let's really think about how we can create these 15-minute cities, because that will have a great impact on decarbonization. Secondly, let's give people the mobility offer to have a zero emission footprint. So on-demand services, great public transport, and so on. And then thirdly, what I would love to see is that we really give back the cities to the nature and to the people, having more parks, more green, and so on, because that also will improve our climate. So yeah, that's from my side.
Thank you, Laura. I mean, so many good points and so many good keywords. It's hard to pick out which one. But definitely the topic of rural transport has also piqued the interest in the chat. Something we tend to focus on cities, also where a large portion of the population will live in future, but should not forget the needs and demands of the rural population, which, to be honest, I'm also guilty of. I work and live in a city state, and my focus is often very much that way. But also considering journeys not only from A to B, but also B to C and C back to A, especially these complex transport needs. And how to achieve those in, like you said, an accessible, safe, economical, and also socially equitable way is a major challenge. But we'll also get back to you. Thanks very much for your opening statement. Now I'd like to invite Benoit on stage, who is the Chief Executive Officer of 15. You're dialing in from Paris today. So bonjour.
Rebecca, bonjour.
15 is an electric bike sharing and long-term bike rental company based in France, but you also operate in several European countries I've seen. But I saw that your background is from civil engineering, and that you have said goodbye to the automotive industry, where you were previously, and joined us on the side of active and shared mobility. So I'm sure you'll touch on that in your opening statement, certainly. But my question to you, as a bike sharing user, operator, avid cyclist, I'm sure, I don't have a question about cycling. I have a question about e-scooters for you. Love them or hate them?
Sorry, what's the question?
The e-scooters.
Oh, not love or hate them.
Yeah, do you love them or do you hate them?
I think that I'm not hating e-scooters. I just think that, and it will be part of my statement, that the solution we need to bring are solutions which are bringing modal shift from carbonized transport, especially car. And I think that e-scooters are just taking people out of walking, probably out of public transport, but not out of their cars. So I'm not a big lover of e-scooters, to be honest. But yeah, it's part of the city today. But I think it's not the best way of decarbonizing the transport.
Thank you. It's always surprising to me how emotional the debate or controversial the debate around e-scooters is, where the real problem is actually much bigger and on four wheels. We've just been conditioned or learned not to see it or not to see them on the topic of cars. And like Laura said, we need to think holistically, and perhaps those we may not be absolute fans, but they play a role. But let's get back to bike sharing and bike rental and what you do, which is more important. And I believe you have some slides you would like to share.
Yes, just before sharing the slide and just to introduce my statement. So thanks for the introduction, Rebecca. So 15, I'm just cautious about explaining what 15 is doing. So we are in the bike sharing, bike renting area, but I'm really cautious about it, because when we are saying bike sharing in the UK, we are thinking about the 30-minute pay-as-you-go systems you have in the city centers. And my statement is really around how do we bring solutions, services, to areas which are far from the city centers. You were mentioning e-scooters. What I've just said about e-scooters is also true partially for bike sharing in the very city centers. And I think that if we want to decarbonize the transport, we really need to bring solutions to the low dense areas, to the rural areas, to the areas which are remote from the city centers. And just as an introduction, we can see what is done today in Paris. In Paris, we have bike sharing system, which is world famous because it's the biggest bike sharing system in Europe, with 20,000 bikes in I would say the city centers. But there's also another system, which is a long-term rental, which is called Veligo, where you have a fleet of 20,000 bikes, which are deployed around the region. So the old system, old bike system in Paris, is 4,000 bikes, and it will be 60,000 bikes in 2024, because the long-term rental system will go up to 40,000 bikes by 2024. Long-term rental is a way of addressing the remote areas, the low dense areas where bike sharing does not make sense because of density, because it's very hard to have a bike sharing system work in an area where you need stations every 200, 300 meters. So long-term rental is a way of addressing these people who need a bike in an area where bike sharing does not really make sense. There's also a third type of usage in bikes, which is much developed in the Netherlands. So I don't have the example in Paris because it doesn't exist, which is the bike in train station, bike services in train station. If we want to develop the usage of bikes in low dense area, you need to work on intermodality, and we need to work on bike and train. And this bike and train station system, so which is called OVFIT in the Netherlands, is a way of bringing bike services outside your station of arrival at the train station, and it allows you to make long distance trip with the last mile, which is done by the bike. All in all, you have three types of I would say bike usage, which is the bike sharing, which is reserved to the city center. You have long-term rental, which is addressing a wider area, which is addressing also lower density areas. And you have the bike and train station, which is addressing almost rural areas, because you can address train stations which are very far from the city centers. If you can go to next slide. The way we see it, and so again, my statement is around how can we bring, we need to bring bike services to low dense areas. The way to do it and the way we are doing it at 15, and where we are pushing for it because it's still at the stage of experimentation, I would say. We are building networks of bike systems, which are addressing the three types of usage that I've just mentioned. So city center with bike sharing, long-term rental for the wider areas, and then bike and train station, which is built around the train networks in a very large area. And we are building networks of bikes, which are done with the same hardware, with the same system, just managing the different type of usages through the app, through the software. And we really think that today, when we think about bike sharing systems, when we think about bike system, especially in the UK, where bike sharing system are just bike sharing in the very center of big cities, which is not driving that much modal shift, because you are just addressing people which are not that dependent to cars, because people who are dependent to cars are living in these areas you see on the screen, which are much further from the city center. So we need to bring this type of services around the train with a long-term rental, with a mix of bike and train station, long-term rental, and bike sharing in city center. Once we have done that with a consistent system which is working with the public transport, then you can bring services to the people living everywhere in the territory, and then you can drive modal shift, and then you can decarbonize transport. So we really need today in the UK, I think, as it is starting to be done in France, to see the bike services outside the bike sharing in the very center, and to see bike services which are addressing the old territory, and especially the low dense areas where the potential of decarbonization is the highest.
Thank you, Benoit. You touched on points that are also quite important or have popped up in the chat. Is this we tend to focus on cities and rural areas, but what about the areas in between the zones where there's a lot of car dependency and also commuter traffic coming into cities, but also equally underserviced groups. Thanks so much for that overview. Quickly, now I would like to move on to our final opening statement from Philippe Vateo. I'd like to open up and say hello, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
So Philippe, you're the deputy mayor of the city of Ghent in Belgium and the alderman for mobility and urban development still. I consider you to be the political backbone of the circulation plan, and not maybe the mastermind, because a process like that is guided by a lot of people, but you are the one on the front lines taking the fire, and you're the one that has to have the background to push through difficult or temporarily unpopular decisions at some point. You're also, obviously, Ghent is an award-winning city for car sharing. You're hosting the Velocity conference next year. So Ghent is dedicated to active and shared mobility. But before I let you give your short opening statement, we all care about sustainable mobility and shared mobility, but we certainly probably also have all a guilty pleasure in transport. What's your guilty transport pleasure?
It's very simple. It's cycling. Cycling is so pleasant and so enjoyable that it's the transport mode that is bringing joy in my life. This morning I got up. I parted at home at 7:30. I took my bicycle. The weather was good. It was pleasant. I was glad. I cycled and I smiled at other cyclists, and really, Rebecca, they smiled back. And at that moment, I felt sorry for the rare car drivers I saw, because car drivers don't smile at each other. Cyclists do. So that's my guilty pleasure.
The cyclists in Belgium do. If you were cycling in northern Germany, maybe not. But I'm glad you went to work with a smile on your face. Great. So you also have some slides that you would like to share.
Yes, I have. Okay. I think Gillian, I fully agree with Gillian. We have to cut in car use, and she spoke about 20%. I think we should be more ambitious than to cut with 20%. I fully agree with you. We have to cut in car use, and I fully agree that honesty is very important. But I should like, Gillian, I should like to combine it with another word, with courage, because I think as a politician, I think it's necessary to have clear statements about the position of the car in the cities, about the dominance of the car in the cities. If we don't have that courage, we will never we will never be able to cut in car use. The logic we use, you can see, is the wheel has to turn. With more car sharing is very important in our solution. With more car sharing, we have less cars on the road, we have safer streets, we have more walking and cycling, so we have less car ownership, and so as a consequence, more car sharing, and the wheel has to turn. So that's what we do in Ghent. And what happened in Ghent with car sharing in the last 20 years, you see here, especially the last 10 years are important. When I started as a deputy mayor, we had about 120 sharing cars. We had about 2,000 people who were member of a car sharing organization. Now we have already 1,200 sharing cars. We have 17,000 members of a car sharing organization. So what we did was to provide free parking spaces for sharing cars. We paid also the membership fee of residents if they became a member of the car sharing organization. And as you see, the evolution is very drastic. So, but car sharing is only one element in our policy, in our mobility policy. We have a circulation plan. We implemented it in 2017. It had a huge impact. We have also a parking plan. We have a policy line where we invest lots of budget in infrastructure for pedestrians and cycling. And so this is what happens then. This, what you see is the goals we formulated in 2013. Our mobility plan, this is what we want to reach. In 2030, we want to have only in our model split, 27% trips by car, 35% in cycling, 18% pedestrians, and 20% of public transport. But what we see is that with our policy of our circulation plan, the parking plan, the car sharing, in 2018, we already had 35% of cycling in our model split. We came from 22% in 2012 to 35% in reality in 2018. The share of cars decreased from 55% in 2012 to 37% in 2018. So it is possible if you are honest and if you have the courage. Important also, parking spots. What we did with parking spots in the last years, we scrapped in Ghent 6,000 parking spots in the last year, in the last 6 years. So you can say every year we scrap 1,000 parking spots in the center of the city, and that's what happened. On the right, you see what happens with the city if you do that. This is the same square you see in two pictures. The picture above is before the circulation plan, I think in 2015, just a normal, a square with lots of cars, and under you see the same square how it is now. This is how cities become when you make clear statements about the position of the car. And then the last slide. This is also what happens, and this is important because of what Julian said. What we see now in Ghent is that the car ownership is decreasing. In 2015, we had per household 1.2 cars. In 2018, 1.1, and in 2021, it's per household 1.0 average. So the car ownership is decreasing, and it means that car sharing will become even more important in Ghent, and so decarbonization will go further. So the wheel can continue to turn, and that's important. So far, Rebecca.
Thank you, Philippe. Thanks very much, Philippe. So it's quite clear, yeah. If you have the courage to be disruptive is Laura's keyword, and honest about the changes that you can actually see clear changes in the built environment and transport behavior, even though the change might temporarily hurt. So I'd like to ask all our panelists to come now on stage for a conversation. Also, I invite the audience to pose questions to the panelists that have not been answered yet in their opening statements. But in the meantime, while we wait for those questions, I have a question for all of you. So last week I was at the Polis conference in Brussels. Polis conference is it's a European network focusing on sustainable transport, and one of the final panel discussions was ministers and deputy mayors talking about the 15-minute city. For those of you who don't know the concept of the 15-minute city, it's basically that everyone living in a city or maybe town or village or suburban area should have access to their basic daily needs within a 15-minute walking or cycling distance, and that's based on the principles of proximity, diversity, density, and ubiquity. And like the city of Ghent, to me, is quite clearly a city focusing or with the mission of becoming a 15-minute city. And a lot of Philippe, what you shared is a phrase that was used last week at the conference and that we all know. It's this question: if you build it, they will come. Gillian, that's my question to you. One often hears that phrase, if you build it, they will come. You're a behavioral specialist. Why is this so relevant? Is it relevant or is it true from your perspective and from the research that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times we legitimately and understandably think about changing behavior as a linear process of, you change people's attitudes, and you might do that by telling them how wonderful their other options are out there. And the idea is that this deficit model, you fill in some gap in their knowledge and their appreciation of the alternatives, and that will change behavior. But actually, lots and lots of ways in which we've changed behavior in society over time has been done completely the other way around. You change behavior, and that changes people's attitudes, and that perpetuates the change in behavior over the longer term. And that's partly what the building it and they will come is. You show it, it's in their face. You give them often no other alternative, and a lot of the resistance that can be in place before something is built or put in place, a lot of it dissipates, and in actual fact, appreciation can grow. But it takes that requires the courage to just do it, because there is often a lot of resistance, obviously, to start with.
There we go. Sorry, couldn't unmute myself for a second. Thanks a lot, Gillian. I think there's two components: the built environment, the infrastructure that's necessary, but also the nudging toward behavioral change, and simply the building it and hoping the users will come is not enough. I would say. We have some questions from the audience. I also have, so juggling a bit of time, but I think it's something that I would like to pose to you, Benoit and Laura, together from the provider perspective. I'd say it's a question. Who asked this? The question was asked that the person works on industrial parks and business parks. So in the non-classic urban settings, a more peripheral setting, that provide alternatives to commutes. But some of these sites are still reluctant to put money on that, perhaps don't see themselves in the responsibility of managing mobility. How do you have any suggestions from your provider perspective of how to change this mentality, how to get non-rural sites on board and carrying the responsibility for also providing alternatives to just car use? Perhaps Laura, yeah.
Sure, I can start. Yeah, first of all, very good question. And we are in charge with various companies to talk exactly about this, because in the end, the DRT service is not only interesting for suburban or rural areas, but especially also for employers. So we talk to them and we look into exactly this kind of constellation, how to get best, for example, from a main station to the company side. And so the question is now how to get there and how to convince them. Okay, there are different opportunities, right? So first of all, there are companies who are already doing it today, and they have maybe really just a very let's say basic offer, and there we can of course start the conversation in regards to DRT and make it even more attractive for the employees. That's maybe the easier way to talk to these that have already thought about it. Then you have the other companies that did not even consider it yet. And of course, if you look at why an employer should do it, there are different reasons. So first of all, shortage of employees is everywhere a topic. So in order to really get the best employees to the site and for the company, that's definitely something that you can use as an argument, because otherwise people cannot get there. Secondly, also they need to have all the car parking space as well, right? So a company needs to provide car parking space for all their employees. So this is another thing. And then also every company is looking at the moment in how to get more sustainable. And they are also on their, let's say, accounting, carbon accounting. They have to put also how the people get to the site. So this is another one where then they can, reduce also their CO2 footprint by having employers coming by train and then shuttling, let's say, with a DRT service to the site. These are just a few examples how you can approach companies and convince them to do this.
Yeah, a lot of good examples, including one of the Cialdini principles. Other companies like you are doing this kind of solution.
Absolutely.
We should
benefit. Yeah.
On board as well. Benoit, would you like to also respond?
Yeah, I think that the services we are provided, and especially the bike services, we see them as part of the public transport. They can't be just seen as a service which can be managed privately, which can be managed by an employer, etc. I think that we need to see the bike services as part of the public transport. It has to be managed by the transport authorities. It has to be developed consistently with the public transport network. And so for me, this is a role of the public authorities to manage this kind of services, or the implementation of these services. Of course, the employers can participate to it, but I think that this is a role of the public authority to push for these services and to manage it as they manage the public transport system.
May I add something there? Yes, I do agree that the public authorities and everyone has to do their job, but I think it has to come from everyone. So it has to come from public authorities, it has to come from the companies, and it has to come from us individuals as well asking for it. And another like great example is also to offer like mobility budgets, right? I mean, what is like always like on the benefits of companies, or you get a car, yeah, fantastic, yeah, what a great deal. Why not offering mobility budgets? Yeah, you get £2,000 or £1,000 per year, and you can do whatever you want, or you can get like a bicycle for it. Yeah, many companies are more going into this direction. So I do believe everyone has to think about how to make this happen.
Thanks to Eugenia for that question. It really got the conversation rolling, because Philippe would like to respond now as well.
Yes, about the responsibility of the authorities. It's not like as if the authorities has the duty to find the solutions for the mobility problems of the companies. It starts earlier, it starts sooner, it starts in urban planning. If you let companies build parking spots and so on, the only thing companies want, and that's, I understand that, is that they want to get their people in their side, on their side, in their company. And so at that moment, the moment they start to build, public authorities have to say, okay, but not everyone should come to the site with a car. And so you won't build the parking garages that you want, that not so many parking spots. It starts there. At that moment, companies will start to search solutions. And for I think e-bikes make that the solutions are easier, because that's a game changer. You have now with the bicycle, you have now distances from to 15 or 20 kilometers you can make with the e-bike. Public transport is very difficult as a solution, because it's very difficult to organize public transport to the needs of companies that start at 8 o'clock in the morning and stop at 5 o'clock in the evening. So it starts with urban planning.
Laura, go ahead, and then I'd like to take a question from the audience that I'd like to post to Pete.
Yeah. Adding to what Philip said, or like just adding a comment to that. Yes, of course, companies, but only via restrictions, I think we will not get far, right? I mean, yes, you can, of course, say less parking, but I do also believe when you do the urban planning, which every city should do like on a regular base, in Germany, it's mandatory. If it's then good or bad, that's another discussion. But I do believe we have to, like, everyone has to do his job or her job, right? And I think also public transport or the city or the council can also make sure to have then the offer for the company and to say, hey, you know what? This is like all the options you have. Yeah, we can add a bus stop, we can add DRT, we can add bicycling. We have it all already in our portfolio. And like giving also the companies the opportunity to really act on it and not needing so many car spaces. Sorry, Rebecca. Go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, Pete, I'd like to give you a chance to answer a question. It's the one from Anna Sunter. If you can see it on the chat, the planning decisions definitely impact how people choose to travel and where they choose to live. And the question is around essentially there are some countries that are very, very good at establishing, alternatives and encouraging sustainable travel behavior, and other countries with as it's called in this question, a legacy transport network that's more challenging. What are you, from your perspective, some tips for the way forward? And and a second question from me on that are digital solutions the way toward achieving the 15-minute city from a behavioral perspective?
Yeah, definitely need more joined up thinking. Definitely need development and transport to come together. Not sufficient only to look at new developments, need to change the planning regulations around existing developments, because if you want to decarbonize by that amount, then you won't be able to do it with only the relatively small increases in new developments. I mean, I've got to tie it together with the elephant in the room. All roads lead to road user charging. We need to talk about road user charging a lot more. It's coming. Don't know when. I didn't have a brilliant insight into this, but that's, if you want to know about digital technologies, it's going to need to be some kind of digital technology that enables a smarter way for road users to be charged for their vehicles. I mean, at the moment, you pay the same for a car whether you keep it in an urban area or a rural area. That seems, on the face of it, unusual. And we need to do a lot more on that point. 15-minute cities also probably need a lot more picking apart. I mean, they're a brilliant concept, but I'd love to hear them better defined. I mean, well, as a geographer myself, if it simply translates into distance, then it's not much more different than saying things within about 5 kilometers of your house. So I think a lot more needs to be done to pick that apart. Rebecca, have you any questions back on that? You're on mute.
I'm also muted. Sorry, classic mistake. The moderator should do that. No, I don't. I'm also conscious of time because didn't expect it, but we're almost at the end of the time for the first session. Philippe, I know you'd like to respond to that, please. There's so many good questions now coming in the chat, but we've got to wrap it up. So, Philippe, your final statement, and then I'll ask the speakers, your panelists, for your.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about digitalization. There's with policymakers, many policymakers talk about digitalization as a solution for sustainable mobility, for the mobility problems, and I think it's not so. So digitalization helps, but only if it says something, if it helps to say us something about the position of the car. If it's only a tool and a gadget, this won't work. It's not at the core of what we should do in mobility. The core is saying statements about the position of the car, and I think that that it can help if road charging, for example, with digitalization is possible, but that means it's something to say about the position of the car and the use of the car, but not with combined mobility and all the gadgets. That is not important. That is in the margin of the debate.
Thanks. That kind of sums up one of my favorite quotes from last week's conference. And very close, is that we shouldn't get lost in technological gadgets if we don't get the basics right.
Yes.
The Secretary General, Karen van Klusen of the Polis Network, said that. So that's a bit provocative, but that's what we were aiming for. So finally, just to wrap up the session, we started a bit late, so hopefully it won't be bad if we go 5 minutes over. I'd like to give all of you the chance to answer one final question from me, and it is because this is the Como UK annual conference. It's a collaborative mobility conference. It's the first session. We've been working together with Como UK for a few years, and we hosted the Shared Mobility Rocks festival or symposium together earlier this year. So same question to all of you. Why does shared mobility rock? You takers, Gillian.
It rocks because it is about using resources efficiently, and that's what we have to do across every resource that we have at our disposal. It's also about accessibility. It's about giving people options and the ability to get about. And I actually truly believe, as much as I've said about needing to restrict car use and completely agree with everything Philip said about the cycle, I actually believe that the only way we are going to achieve this is to make the car part of the solution. So this isn't about car versus no car. This is about the role of the car in the future. And the role of the car is shared, but there is still a role for the car. And that's why it rocks.
Yep.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks. Pete, would you like to share next? Why does shared mobility rock?
I think it's similar, but just broadening out to a global perspective. I think there's about 1 billion vehicles in the world, making about 100 million a year. There's just not enough to go around if for a future where other countries develop and want and deserve and use the vehicles to get around. So we need to share them, and it liberates people from having to foot the bill for all the costs of these really expensive assets. So it gives it spreads out the ability to use a car for more people. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Laura, why does shared mobility rock to you?
Well, shared mobility rocks for different reasons. First of all, it has a great ecological impact because it's shared. We know cars are just driven 1 hour in average per day. So already there, it's like a resource. It's less emission, like by constructing them, but like manufacturing, but then also by driving them, because you are more than one person maybe in the car and so on. Depends what kind of car sharing model you look at. Then secondly, it has a great social impact. Pete, you were just mentioning it. Not everyone can afford a car. So we are bringing also more mobility to more people by having these sharing models. And then last but not least, I believe that sharing gives also the opportunity of really covering better the passenger, like the customer needs in regards to when and where I would like to be mobile.
Ausgezeichnet, excellent. Benoit?
Yes, of course. My first answer would be the use of resources and the fact that it shared is the better use of resources. But I think that also with shared mobility, we have a better way to plan the mobility when it's individual vehicles. Everyone individually is planning his trips, etc. When you have a shared mobility, which can be car, which can be bikes, you need to think it overall. You need to think it for the community, and you need to think it to plan the way the mobility is done. So it's much better for transport planning.
Thanks. And Philippe, why does it rock?
Shared mobility rocks when I use a sharing car and I listen to Nick Cave, then it rocks. But of course it rocks because it's fantastic. It's a fantastic solution. It's not only a mobility solution, but it's also a social solution, just what Laura said. But it rocks especially because it changes how you look at mobility. Since I don't have a car anymore, and I must say many deputy mayors and many cities have their own car because they are so important, but I don't have a car anymore. I use a sharing car when I need a car. It changes how you look at mobility. And that's so important that people change in their views about mobility, and shared mobility helps us. So it rocks. And Nick Cave helps also.
Exactly. There's a comment. Somebody said they came here for Nick Cave references and they got them. So in final shared mobility rocks tradition, I'd like to take a photo or a screenshot with you. The speakers, if you're in the audience, feel free to share your camera as well, so we can get a joint photo for all of those who are fighting and working to decarbonize transport to meet those goals that we so urgently have to meet by 2030. There is no other option. Thanks so much to the panelists for being here, for sharing their insights, and let's all take a photo and say shared mobility rocks. Great. Dave, thanks for getting a screenshot from that as well. So okay. In closing, what did we learn in this session? A lot, so many great statements. Obviously, good conversation, never enough time. But we learned that Homo urbanus, or Homo suburbanites and rurals as well, they are predictably irrational, right? But by applying dollars and cents and creating transport for humans, this is Pete's book, we can foster sharing cities, happy cities, and prevent our planet from turning from mostly harmless to the uninhabitable Earth. I never travel without my favorite LPs and without my favorite books, and those are some of them. Thanks so much for joining us in the Thinking Tent today, to all of our panelists and audience. And sorry, we're out of time, but we hope you got you thinking, and most importantly, inspired to get and keep doing now. So now, coming up now, we've got a short break for you until 11:15 UK time. 12:15 Central European time if you're joining from the mainland. Take a break and have a wonderful rest of the conference, great insights, inspiration, and let's all rock this together. Take care.